The motorcade moved like a black river through downtown Manhattan. 3 armored SUVs. 12 security personnel. One man sitting in the back of the lead vehicle, adjusting his cufflinks for the 4th time in 20 minutes. Zion Mercer didn't do nervous. He did controlled, calculated, precise. Today was supposed to be the most organized day of his life. Every detail had been confirmed. The venue, the guest list, the ceremony. 400 people waiting at the Meridian Grand. Political figures, financial heavyweights, 3 men whose names were never printed in newspapers but who ran half of what happened in this country. Zion had built alliances for years that would all be sealed in 2 hours with a single signature and a gold ring. His driver said something about traffic. Zion wasn't listening. He was watching the intersection ahead. The light had just turned red, and a crowd of pedestrians was crossing 5th Avenue in both directions. Suits, strollers, delivery workers, tourists with cameras. The ordinary noise of a city that never slowed down for anyone. Zion's eyes moved across the crowd the way they always did. Scanning, assessing, old habit. Then everything stopped. Not the city. The city kept moving. But something inside Zion's chest locked like a door slamming shut. Because there, walking through the crosswalk in a cream-colored jacket, moving with that unhurried, quiet ease that Zion had memorized 6 years ago, was a face he had spent 3 years trying to forget and the last 3 years pretending he had. Caius Arden, walking, alive, right there, and holding both hands of 2 small boys. Twin boys, maybe 5 or 6 years old, matching dark backpacks, one laughing at something Caius had just said, the other looking up at him with an expression so full of trust it was almost painful to see. Zion's hand pressed flat against the window glass. The boy on the left turned his head toward the street, just for a second, and Zion felt his blood go cold. Those eyes, deep set, dark at the edges, slightly tilted at the outer corners. Those were Zion's eyes. He had seen them every morning for 34 years. The boy on the right smiled at something wide, crooked, pulling harder on the left side than the right. Zion's jaw tightened. That smile. That was his smile. His mother used to say he smiled like he was letting you in on a secret. He had hated hearing that as a teenager. Now that exact expression was on the face of a child he had never seen before in his life. The light changed. The motorcade began to move. Stop the car. His driver hesitated. Sir, we're already behind schedule. Marcus. One word. Flat. Final. The SUV stopped. Zion's eyes tracked Caius across the intersection until the crowd closed around him, and he disappeared between 2 buildings. Gone. Again. Zion sat perfectly still, his hands still against the glass. The city moving around him like it didn't understand what had just happened. HI viewers, if someone you loved vanished without warning and came back years later with children who looked exactly like you, what would your first move be? Drop it in the comments. 2 hours. He had 2 hours until the most important ceremony of his adult life. And his entire body was telling him nothing about that ceremony mattered anymore. His phone buzzed. His fiancée's name lit up the screen. Zion didn't answer it. He was already pulling up his security chief's number. Because those children were either the greatest coincidence of his life, or proof that 6 years of believing he had been abandoned was the biggest lie anyone had ever told him. 6 years earlier, Zion Mercer didn't eat breakfast alone. That was the detail his mind kept returning to in the back of that SUV. Not the grand gestures. Not the trips or the gifts or the evenings at places that required reservations 3 months in advance. Just breakfast. Simple, quiet, unhurried breakfast with Caius Arden sitting across from him, reading something on his phone, occasionally pushing half his toast onto Zion's plate without being asked because he had noticed, somewhere along the way, that Zion always finished his food first. That kind of attention, that was what Caius had. He noticed things, small things, the kind of things that powerful men rarely received because everyone around them was too focused on being noticed themselves. Caius had been brought into Zion's circle through a business connection, a legal firm his family used, low-level introduction, forgettable on paper. But Caius himself was not forgettable. He asked real questions. He pushed back when Zion was wrong. He laughed at things that were actually funny and went quiet when the moment called for it. No performance, no agenda, just a person. In a world full of transactions dressed up as relationships, that was rarer than Zion knew how to explain. They kept their relationship completely private. Zion's world didn't allow for softness in public. Anyone connected to him personally became a target, and Caius understood that without needing it spelled out. So they built something small and real and hidden, and for 14 months it held. But Zion's security team had noticed something in those final weeks. A car parked too long on the wrong block. A face that appeared twice in locations it shouldn't have. Someone was watching them. Zion had flagged it internally and increased Caius's security detail without telling him why, not wanting to alarm him before the threat was confirmed. He never got the chance to tell him anything, because 3 days later, Caius came home from a late meeting and his expression had changed. Something closed off behind his eyes. Zion noticed it. He just didn't know yet what it meant. That night, Caius was quieter than usual. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after Zion fell asleep. Later, Zion would wonder what was going through his mind in those hours. Later, he would give everything he had to go back to that moment and stay awake. The next morning, Caius overheard something. A phone call, a meeting, words that were never meant for him. His face when he came back into the room was unreadable. He kissed Zion on the cheek, said he was running an errand, and then he was gone. Within 48 hours, Zion's most trusted advisor handed him an envelope. Photographs, documents, transactions, all of it pointing at Caius, all of it saying the same thing. He played you. Zion stared at the evidence for a long time. He wanted to believe it was wrong, but the pain was already moving faster than his logic. And pain never waits for confirmation. Zion found Caius at his apartment. He didn't call first, didn't send someone ahead. He drove there himself, which he almost never did, because he needed to see Caius's face when he walked through that door. Caius opened it and froze. He knew. Zion could see it immediately, that flicker of recognition, the way Caius's shoulders pulled back slightly, bracing. Zion held up the envelope. "Tell me these are fake." Caius looked at the documents, then back at Zion. His mouth opened. "Zion, listen to me. Whatever those say, I need you to let me explain before. Tell me they're fake, Caius." Silence. That silence cost everything. It wasn't guilt. Zion would understand that later, much later, when it was far too late. It was fear. Caius was calculating, in real time, how much he could say without putting Zion's life in direct danger. He was trying to find a version of the truth that protected them both. But Zion didn't know that. All he heard was the pause. And the pause broke him. 6 years. Zion's voice dropped low. "I gave you 6 years of my private life. Things I have never shown another person. And you sold that." "I didn't." "Don't." The word came out harder than Zion intended. Or maybe exactly as hard. He wasn't sure anymore. What followed was ugly. Fast. The kind of argument that doesn't build, it detonates. Words that couldn't be recalled once released. Zion said things designed to wound because he was wounded, and he was very good at identifying exactly where a person was most vulnerable. Caius didn't fight back. That should have told Zion something. Instead, it read as confirmation. Caius left the apartment first. Zion stood in the center of the room for a long time after the door closed. He told himself the tightness in his chest was anger. He told himself that for 3 years. For days later, Caius Arden ceased to exist in any database science people could access. No forwarding address. No financial trail. No contact with anyone from his previous life. Gone. Completely. And 3 weeks after that, when a housekeeper found a sealed envelope tucked behind the radiator in Caius's former apartment, addressed to Zion in Caius's handwriting, it was handed to the wrong person. Not to Zion. To the man who had manufactured the evidence in the first place. Zion never knew the letter existed. For 6 years, he carried a version of the story with a crucial page missing. Back in the present, Zion had exactly 90 minutes before he was expected at the altar. He spent the first 10 of them on the phone with Darius Cole, his head of private intelligence, the man who had quietly handled situations that couldn't appear in any official record. I need everything on Caius Arden. Current location. Current life. Whatever he's been doing since he dropped off in the fall 6 years ago. I need it fast. Darius didn't ask questions. That was why Zion paid him. Back at the Meridian Grand, the wedding coordinator was sending back-to-back messages. The florist needed a final confirmation. The officiant had arrived. 400 guests were being seated in a room that had cost more to rent for one afternoon than most people made in a year. Zion's fiancée, Beckett Holloway, sent a single text. "You good?" Zion typed back, "Fine." Running slightly behind. He was not fine. He was sitting in a hotel suite adjacent to the venue. Jacket off, tie loosened, staring at the wall while his phone processed requests that were pulling at something 6 years old and not even close to finished. 40 minutes in, Darius called back. He's been in Brooklyn, Flatbush area. Works 2 jobs. Morning shift at a community health clinic. Evening admin work for a nonprofit. Has for about 4 years. A pause. He has children, Zion. 2 boys. Registered at PS 181. Birthday records show they were born 8 months after. After what? After the last documented date of your relationship. The room went very quiet. Zion sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. 8 months. He ran the math without wanting to. He ran it twice. Both times it landed in the same place. A window of time that connected directly back to him. I need DNA confirmation. That requires getting close enough to. I know what it requires. Make it happen. Beckett knocked on the suite door 40 minutes later and walked in to find Zion still in the same position. Jacket on the floor, phone in his hand. Zion. Beckett's voice was careful. We have 45 minutes. Zion looked up. He wanted to say something reassuring. Something that would hold the moment together long enough for him to process what was collapsing inside him. Instead he said, I need a little more time. Beckett studied him for a long moment, then left without answering, and Zion's phone lit up with a message from Darius. Preliminary samples acquired. Lab results. 48 hours. But Zion, the boy's birth certificates. There's no father listed on either one. No father. Caius had raised them completely alone. For 6 years. With no name in that blank space. The DNA results came back in 31 hours. Not 48. Darius had called in every favor he had. Zion was in his office at Mercer Holdings when the confirmation hit his phone. 2 lines that shouldn't have been able to restructure a man's entire interior world, but did exactly that. Paternity confirmed. 99.97%. Both subjects. He read it 3 times. Then he set the phone face down on his desk and sat very still for a long time. Both of them. He had sons. 2 of them. 5 years old, in backpacks, crossing Fifth Avenue holding the hand of the person Zion had spent 6 years convincing himself he hated, because hating was easier than the alternative. The alternative was grief. And grief was not something Zion Mercer had ever known how to carry. Darius had spent the 31 hours building a full picture of Caius's life since he disappeared. He walked Zion through it in the conference room with the door locked. No assistants, no secondary staff. It was not an easy picture. Caius had arrived in Brooklyn with nothing. No financial safety net, every account had been closed, every resource cut off in ways that, looking back at the timeline, looked less like a clean exit and more like a deliberate erasure. He'd found a room to rent from a church family in Flatbush. He'd been pregnant and alone in a city of 8 million people, without a single contact he could safely reach out to. He worked until 2 weeks before the boys were born. Went back to work 6 weeks after. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. The clinic during the day, admin work at night, and for 8 months during the boys' second year, a weekend cleaning shift at a hotel on Atlantic Avenue. He'd faced discrimination at 2 of those jobs. Filed a formal complaint at one. Won nothing. Moved on. He had never applied for any financial assistance connected to Zion's name or Mercer Holdings. Not once. Not a single message, legal filing, or contact attempt in 6 years. Zion stared at the table. He protected them, Darius said quietly. Whatever happened 6 years ago, he decided protecting those boys meant staying completely invisible. Zion didn't respond. He was thinking about the blank space on those birth certificates. Not out of anger, out of something that had no clean name. Something that sat in his chest like a stone he hadn't noticed accumulating weight until this exact moment. "There's one more thing," Darius said. He pulled up a file on the screen. "One of our investigators found a witness. Former employee of yours. Retired. Living in Westchester." Darius paused. "He says he has information about the documents you received 6 years ago. The ones that started all of this." Zion looked up slowly. "He's been trying to get this information to you for 5 years," Darius continued. "He says he was blocked every time." The stone in Zion's chest shifted. "He claims," Darius said carefully, "that Caius never betrayed you." The room was completely silent. "He claims someone else did." The witness's name was Eldridge Voss, 71 years old. Former logistics coordinator for Mercer Holdings. Retired to a quiet house in Westchester with a garden. He tended every morning, and a secret he had been carrying for 5 years like a brick sewn into his chest. Zion was at his door by 7 a.m. Eldridge opened it, looked at Zion's face, and stepped aside without a word. They sat at a kitchen table. Coffee between them. Neither touched it. Eldridge slid a manila folder across the table. "I tried to get this to you 3 times, he said. "First time, I was told you weren't accepting outside communications regarding that matter. Second time, the email bounced back from a server that shouldn't have been able to block it. Third time," he paused. "A man came to my house, told me to stop." Zion opened the folder. Financial records, internal memos, timestamps, and photographs, surveillance photographs that showed something very specific. The documents Zion had received 6 years ago, the ones that destroyed everything, had been assembled in a private office inside Mercer Holdings itself. Not by Caius, by someone else. Zion turned a page. The name at the bottom of one internal transfer authorization stopped him cold. Reeves Ashton, his consigliere, his most trusted advisor. The man who had handed Zion that original envelope with an expression of carefully arranged regret. The man who had sat across from Zion at every major decision for 8 years, who knew every weakness, every private holding, every person Zion cared about. Reeves. Zion's hand went flat on the table. The financial records don't match, Eldridge said quietly. The transactions they attributed to Caius. Those funds moved through accounts registered to shell companies that trace back to Reeves's family trust. I found it by accident during a routine audit. He exhaled. I should have pushed harder to reach you. I've thought about that every day. Zion stared at the documents. 6 years. Reeves had handed him fabricated evidence with steady hands and watched Zion walk away from the only person who had ever seen him clearly. Then he had spent 6 years managing Zion's empire from the inside. Zion closed the folder. Stood up. One more thing, Eldridge said. The records show Reeves had outside help. The family backing your upcoming wedding alliance, the Holloways, their financial fingerprints are in here too. Zion turned slowly. The wedding, Eldridge said, was never about you. Zion pulled every financial record connected to Beckett Holloway's family by noon. It took his forensic accounting team 4 hours to map what Reeves and the Holloways had built together over 6 years. 4 hours to see what had been constructed, quietly and carefully, right underneath Zion's empire. The picture was not complicated once you saw it. Reeves had identified years ago that a direct power move against Zion would fail. Zion was too protected, too careful, too difficult to outmaneuver head-on. So he chose a different route. Remove the one person who kept Zion emotionally grounded. Create a betrayal so personal that Zion would close himself off completely. From softness, from trust, from anything that made him human and therefore harder to control. Then spend 6 years becoming indispensable. Then engineer a marriage into the Holloway family, whose holdings, once legally merged with Mercer's through matrimony, would give Reeves the board leverage he needed. Not a hostile takeover, a slow replacement. Reeves was never trying to destroy Zion's empire. He was trying to inherit it. That mattered. Pause on that, because it meant Caius had been targeted not out of random cruelty, but because Reeves had studied Zion well enough to know exactly who to remove. Zion sat with that for 30 seconds. Then he called his legal team. Then his security chief. Then he froze every Mercer Holdings account that Reeves had any access to, effective immediately. His phone rang 4 minutes later. Reeves. Zion let it go to voicemail. Then something else hit him. If Reeves had monitored Zion this closely for 6 years, if he knew everything, tracked every move, blocked every attempt to reach Zion with the truth, then Reeves likely knew about the DNA results. He likely knew about Caius. And if the Holloway alliance was now collapsing in real time, and Reeves understood that Zion was pulling on threads that led directly back to him, Caius wasn't safe. Neither were the boys. Zion was already moving before the thought finished forming. His security chief picked up on the first ring. Find Caius Arden. Right now. Brooklyn, Flatbush. I need eyes on him and those children in the next 15 minutes. A pause on the other end. Zion. His security chief's voice was flat. We already had a team doing a welfare check per your earlier order. And they arrived at his apartment 20 minutes ago. Silence. He's gone. Both boys too. Neighbors say they left in a hurry. One of them saw a black car parked outside earlier that morning that didn't belong to the block. Zion's chest locked. Gone. Again. The wedding venue was still fully staffed when Zion's SUV pulled away from it permanently. 400 guests. A catered dinner. A string quartet. A ceremony that had been 6 months in the planning. Zion left all of it without a single explanation. His security team fanned out across Brooklyn within the hour. 3 units. 12 personnel. Every contact, every neighbor of Caius's, every person connected to PS 181 who might know where he would go if he was scared and running. Because that was what this was. Caius was running. Not from Zion. from whoever Reeves had sent. Darius coordinated from the car, phone against his ear, laptop open, cross-referencing cell tower data and traffic camera feeds across a 4-mile radius of the Flatbush apartment. Zion sat in the back seat and said nothing. He was thinking about what Caius must have felt, getting a warning, whatever form it came in, and having to move 2 5-year-old boys out of an apartment fast enough that neighbors noticed. No car of his own. No resources. Probably 20 minutes or less to decide how far and in which direction. Zion knew how Caius thought. He had spent 14 months learning it. Caius didn't run toward help. He ran toward familiar. Somewhere he had been before. Somewhere that felt like it had walls. Church, Zion said. Darius looked up. He rented a room from a church family when he first arrived in Brooklyn. Pull that record. Whatever congregation it was, find the address. 8 minutes later, Darius had it. Mount Calvary Community Church, Nostrand Avenue. The pastor's family had a house attached to the back of the building. The kind of place that didn't show up on any map. The kind of place you only knew about if someone had once opened the door for you when you had nowhere else to go. The team arrived in 11 minutes. The house looked quiet from the outside. Too quiet. Zion got out of the SUV before it fully stopped. His security chief grabbed his arm. We don't know if Reeves's people are already inside. Zion looked at him. Then we move faster. They cleared the exterior in 90 seconds. No hostile presence. The pastor's wife opened the back door before they knocked. She had been watching from the window. Her face said everything. He's here, she said. He came 2 hours ago. He was trying to hold it together for the boys. She stepped aside. The hallway was dim and smelled like candle wax and old wood. And at the end of it, sitting on a bench with one boy asleep against his shoulder and the other gripping his hand, was Caius Arden. He looked up. For a full 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Caius's jaw tightened and he pulled both boys closer. How did you find us? Not a question. A wall. And Zion, who had walked into every room of his adult life knowing exactly what to say, stood at the end of that hallway with nothing. Nothing except the truth. And 6 years of it. Caius did not run. He stayed on that bench, both boys pressed against him, and waited for Zion to speak first. The younger boy, Zion would later learn his name was Soren, was still asleep. The older one, Ames, was watching Zion with dark, careful eyes that were too steady for a 5-year-old. Like he had already learned that the world required watching. That observation landed somewhere painful. Zion pulled a chair from the corner and sat down. Not close. Across the narrow hallway. Giving Caius the distance he clearly needed. I know what the documents were, Zion said. I know who made them. I know what was done to you. Caius didn't flinch, but something moved through his face. Fast, controlled, buried again just as quickly. How long have you known? Caius said. 36 hours. A short, hard exhale. 6 years, Caius said. Not accusatory, just factual. The way you state something that is simply permanently true. I had 36 hours and 6 years, Zion. You can do the math on what those two things feel like standing next to each other. Zion didn't defend himself. There was no version of a defense that held up against what Caius had walked through alone. The jobs, the discrimination, the pregnancy, the boys growing up with a blank space on a legal document where a father's name should have been. Why didn't you try to reach me? Zion said. After a year. After 2. Caius looked at him for a long time. Then he said very quietly, because the people who made me leave told me that if I contacted you, you would be killed. And I believed them, because they were specific enough and connected enough, and I had already watched them erase me from your world in 72 hours. He looked down at Soren's sleeping face. I made a choice. Every single day I made that choice. And I am not going to apologize for protecting you, even if it cost me everything. The room was completely still. Ames, who had been silent the entire time, shifted slightly. Then he looked directly at Zion. Are you our dad? The question was simple, honest, uncomplicated. The way children ask things that adults spend years avoiding. Zion's throat tightened in a way he hadn't prepared for. Yes, he said. Ames studied him for a moment. Why weren't you there when we were little? And there it was. 5 words. No accusation in his voice. No anger. Just a genuine question from a child who wanted to understand the shape of the world he had been handed. Zion had no answer that was good enough. He knew it. Caius knew it. Even Ames, at 5 years old, seemed to understand on some level that the pause was its own kind of answer. I didn't know, Zion said finally. And that is the truest thing I can tell you. Ames considered that. Then he leaned back against Caius and said nothing more. Caius was watching Zion with an expression that held every season of the last 6 years in it. Exhaustion, grief, the particular hardness of someone who had survived something they were never supposed to survive alone. He didn't forgive Zion. Not in that hallway. That wasn't the kind of thing that happened in one conversation. But he didn't tell him to leave either. And then the pastor's wife appeared at the far door. Her face had changed. There are 2 cars on the street, she said. They've been sitting there for 10 minutes. Caius pulled both boys close. Zion stood up. The hallway that had held 6 years of grief in the span of 20 minutes suddenly had a different kind of weight in it. Reeves wasn't finished. Reeves Ashton was taken into federal custody at 4:17 a.m., 6 days after Zion walked into that church hallway. It didn't happen the way it does in movies. No dramatic confrontation. No final speech. Just a door opening and agents stepping through it, and a man in an expensive bathrobe suddenly understanding that 8 years of careful construction had collapsed in under a week. The evidence Eldridge had preserved, combined with what Zion's forensic team pulled once the accounts were frozen, was enough. Wire fraud, conspiracy, falsification of corporate records. The Holloway family's legal team spent the following week in emergency sessions trying to wall off their exposure. It didn't work. The wedding was formally canceled. The alliance dissolved. And Reeves Ashton, for the first time in 8 years, had nothing to manage and no one to manipulate. Zion gave a single statement to his board, kept it factual, left the personal parts out entirely. That wasn't for them. What happened next was slower than any of it. Harder in some ways, because dismantling a conspiracy takes weeks. Rebuilding what a conspiracy destroyed takes much longer. Zion didn't move Caius into his home. Didn't make grand declarations. Didn't try to compress 6 years of absence into a gesture. Those were the moves of a man trying to feel better about what he had done. Zion was trying to actually do better. Those are not the same thing. He showed up. Consistently. Tuesday mornings he took the boys to school. Not a driver, him. Ames wanted to know why the buildings downtown were so tall. Soren wanted to know if pigeons slept. Zion answered every question seriously, the way Caius had once answered his. He and Caius met for coffee once a week. Neutral ground. A place in Flatbush that Caius had chosen. They talked about the boys, logistics, school schedules, then gradually other things. It was not comfortable, always. Some weeks Caius was quiet in a way that had distance in it. Some weeks Zion said the wrong thing and knew it immediately, and the hour ended earlier than planned. Trust doesn't rebuild on a schedule. It shows up in pieces. Small ones. unannounced. For months after the hallway, on a Saturday morning that was ordinary in every way that mattered, Zion was in the backyard of the house he had rented near Caius's neighborhood, close enough to be present, far enough to give Caius space to breathe. He was on the ground, actually on the ground, building something out of wooden blocks with Soren that had no clear architectural logic but tremendous structural ambition. Ames was sitting on the back steps watching. He had been watching for 20 minutes. Then he came down the steps, sat next to Zion on the grass, and without any announcement or ceremony leaned against Zion's arm and said, very quietly, "Dad." Not a question this time, just a word, a door opening. Zion went very still. He didn't make a sound, didn't turn it into a moment, just kept his hand steady on the blocks and let the words sit between them like something alive. Across the yard, Caius was standing in the doorway with a coffee cup in both hands. He had seen it. He didn't smile exactly, but something in his face released, slowly, the way light comes through a window when a cloud shifts. Like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time had finally been allowed to simply exist. He watched Zion on the grass with their sons, and he let himself wonder, quietly without forcing it, whether a heart that had been broken in the right places could eventually let something real back through the cracks. Not today, maybe not for a while, but the door was open. And that was more than 6 years ago could have promised either of them. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell us, what part hit you the hardest? Was it Caius's silence to protect the man he loved? Or Ames asking that one question no father has a perfect answer to? Your thoughts matter here. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we bring you stories about love, sacrifice, and the kind of strength that doesn't make the news but changes lives anyway. The next one is coming. You don't want to miss it.